All right, and this is the deep dive, spoiler-filled discussion video on Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, you might want to consider pausing this, watching the film, coming back to it. Otherwise, let's dig in. So the issue that I had with the binding segment, as I covered in the RotD review there, is that ultimately it didn't make sense and it didn't matter within the context of the entirety of the movie. A lot of it felt really out of place, and I think that maybe that's just because this is an early compilation horror film. It's not the first one that's ever been that method of filmmaking, but it is certainly one of the first. And I don't know if that's why or what, but it just didn't really know how to bind them. Principally, the fact that Dr. Terror was reading everybody's fortune, and none of them made sense. You would think that in the context of where the story wound up ending, that all of their fortunes would be exactly the same, and that's pretty much train death. 5 minutes, and that's it. They had these other storylines where they went through these other situations, and then as far as how to get out of it was the death card. And that didn't make a whole lot of sense either, because if Dr. Terror is death, as the ending so implied, then why would he even pull that fifth card? Why would he even mention that there's a way out of your futures and then constantly pull the death card and seem surprised by it? He's death. So it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. It was a good layup for, I'm going to go through 5 different stories, and you're going to be in it, and you're going to be in it, and you're going to be in it. But other than that, it didn't make sense, and it didn't hold together. I already went through the aesthetic issues that I had with the voodoo segment. Other than the aesthetic feel to it, it wasn't compelling to me. It went on too long. It focused way too much on the whole jazz scene there and the music. And I know that he was stealing the music, and that's an element of it, but it still went on too long. It just ultimately was my least favorite portion of the entirety of the movie. The werewolf part, I liked the fact that it was kind of, it had a twist of tying into legacies of the family history and, the fact that they called the architect out there for the specific reason of him being him and, his legacy being his legacy. I didn't see that coming, and I thought that was a really good touch. Him finding the coffin and with an increasing level of suspicious evidence, the plaster being new, I thought were really good subtle touches to it. The creeping vine segment, I liked how they were getting into the stages of plant evolution, right? From lichen to fern to floral plants, and then is this the next step in evolution? And I liked where they were going with that. It just kind of felt like it felt a little bit like there wasn't enough explanation or conclusion. It felt like we had the storyline as it was presented, and then it just abruptly ended without a whole lot there. Again, I wish we could have just given up some of voodoo and put it more into creeping vine and had some more there, because I liked where they were going with it. I just didn't like that it was so abrupt. Disembodied hand, I loved everything about. Not just because that was the thing that kind of got me into this movie, but because I thought it was actually the strongest segment of the group here. It had the moral message. It had the character that was out for revenge, and it had the spiritually out for revenge. It had the character that was just terrible in his own nature, and then got his comeuppance. It was just really classic. And I don't know about you, but I found that the special effect of the disembodied hand itself was really spectacular. It wasn't just a guy with a false bottom, and it wasn't the thing with the out of the box, from the Addams Family. it creeped along and it looked gruesome and was even able to be picked up with tongs and moved around and thrown in a fire while still moving. And, given the effects that were available in 1965, I thought that was pretty good. So just aces on that one all around. And lastly, Vampire. I should give an explanation of where I thought that was going. Because it was the last segment, and because Donald Sutherland seemed a little bit sinister in the train right before his segment was being told, I really thought that he was using his wife as a scapegoat, that he was the vampire the whole time, and that the reveal of that would happen in the train as he killed everybody. That's where I thought it was going. And I'm not the kind of person that'll come up with fan fiction and be a fanboy and say one's better than the other, that my idea trumps what is actually to print there. But I think it would have been interesting, and I think that it would have made more sense of the binding storyline. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I just think about. Generally, every one of the segments there, generally what I had issue with, and generally what I really loved about this movie. I enjoy a good classic, and this fit the bill and scratched that itch perfectly. So, maybe not the scariest movie in the world, and, I can forgive that to some degree, but not entirely, because there are instances of movies this old or older that do provide really genuine good scares. However, I was also looking up movies of this exact year. I did a Google search for horror movies of 1965, and the list is terrible. It's all giant ants and terrible rubber foam monster movies. And I have to say that in that context, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors really stands out. It's well acted, it's well written, and it's certainly scarier than the giant ant counterpart of that year. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I think about it. I think it's worth watching. I recommend it to anybody that has a love of horror and wants to dig into some classic territory. And I do want to get into more classic territory within the RotD channel here. Like I said, I'm going to be covering a movie from 1911 pretty soon here, and I want to have a good foundation for fans of horror like myself that want to approach things in a fashion that allows you to have some historical perspective. So yeah, be looking for recent movies, and also be looking for classic movies. And I think another thing I want to do is I was cataloging all my reviews so far, and there's a suspicious absence of 1980s movies, and that was a really fun time. So I'm going to be getting more into that too. So that should about do it for this day's worth of RotD videos. If you like what you see here, I would really recommend that you leave comments and tell me if you agree with me, tell me if you disagree with me, and engage, and I will engage with you. I will respond and go through there. If you like what you see here, then the subscribe button's right there. So that should about do it. Until tomorrow, thank you for joining me here today.